Hello, welcome to this Lit in 5 video on Keats Lamia. This video explores some other possible, or contenders if you like, for the position of antagonist. So we're approaching this poem for AQA's tragedy module from that perspective. There's a separate video on Lamia herself as antagonist, in inverted commas, a deeply sort of ambiguous character which inspires ambivalence in the reader towards her in terms of the role of antagonist. But for now, I thought we'd widen our discussion and increase our AO1/5 possibilities to consider some other characters as the antagonist. At certain points in the poem, once you start getting into at certain points, then invariably you have to think about structure, the order in which Keats introduces characters, or the order in which Keats introduces changes or shifts in the characters. So we're going to look at Lysias, Apollonius, and Cupid/Love. Note the capital L, because you can see those as interchangeable, different names for the same entity or being, and to another extent, the external world as well. So we're going to be considering all these possibilities. Remember, tragedy as a genre complicates and problematizes the audience's, if it's a play, Shakespeare, or the reader's interpretations of characters. Deliberately so, purposely so. At one stage, say for example Act 2, the audience may be pretty comfortable with how they are viewing Othello. Something will change. There'll be strategic hinge points where we start to see change and difference, and then maybe 2 scenes later we're completely other or different in how we are likely to view Othello or Willy Loman or any of these tragic characters. Lamia is not a tragedy in the sense that it is not a play inspired by sort of Aristotelian thoughts. However, there's an argument that she is one of the most compelling tragic characters because of those reasons, to complicate and problematize how an audience can, may, might, and will view her. Endlessly fascinating to debate the character of Lamia. But she's a different video. For now, we're looking at these other characters, and there's a lovely painting of Lamia in all her monstrous beauty, or her beautiful monstrousness, to use a nice Keatsian paradox. On we go. Okay, so let's take Apollonius first of all, and you notice on the top there the allegorical qualities he represents, namely thought or reason. You'll know, or you remember, that Keats came up with the concept of negative capability, where dreams, escapism, passions live outside of a sort of blissful seclusion and retreat away from the world of science, all its explanations. There's a lovely bit in the poem where he talks about what is the purpose of unpicking and explaining a rainbow. Just enjoy the beauty of the rainbow. So in this sense, Apollonius, and you can hear an echo of the name Apollo in there. So lurking within Apollonius's character name is the god Apollo, the god of logic and reason. So he's obviously a take on him. They are opposing forces, of course, to things like dreams, bliss, escapism, love, passions. So those qualities are in conflict in this poem, and certain characters allegorically represent that. I just thought I'd start here with a quote from the sort of early narrative, the sort of miniature subplot really, which doesn't foreshadow or tragically foreshadows the fate of Lamia and Lysias. Hermes and the nymph appear to achieve bliss and love and seclusion in the green recessed woods. But even early on, look, within that love story, if you like, you can see the kind of damaging presence of thought and reason within Hermes and the nymph as well. In vain, the sweet nymph might nowhere be found, and so he rested, Hermes, on the lonely ground, pensive, full of thought, okay, je pense, French, I think, and full of painful jealousies. So look at how thinking, the mind, logic and reason, is already sort of anathema, or sort of, don't put it in your essay, but the kryptonite for love, and passion and joy. So there it is, even in the early stage, in two of the arguably minor characters. Our next bank of quotations here is sort of like the near miss, I guess. There's Lysias muffling his face, hiding his presence as they go through Corinth, and then we see Apollonius. Now, one of the signature things related to Apollonius in terms of imagery is his stare or his gaze, okay? So you can see their sharp eyes, and then we get things like his quick eyes. So that penetrative stare. We'll get into the irony of that in a moment. There's lots of sort of that female mythology, those destructive female archetypes that are associated with Lamia, the sirens, Medusa, sort of like a basilisk quality, Circe. All of these female archetypes, the femme fatales of mythology, if you like, which create destruction. But it's interesting to note that the cold, hard, logical stare of Apollonius, I think, is reversed here. Keats gives the figure of reason and thought that sort of Medusa-like power, or that basilisk power, to stir and destroy as well. So I'll flag that up to you when we see it in other examples as well, but it's important to note straight away his stare, okay? A nice little structural reminder there as well, which is foreshadowing. So Lysias shrinks into his mantle as he passes Apollonius. He's muffling his face, of course. This is almost using sort of his fingers and his clothing to shield himself from that destructive stare of thought and reason. A little structural link back to Hermes there as well, adding wings to haste. So there's Lycius and Lamia wanting to get a move on and get away from prying eyes and people like Apollonius. But the wings recalls Hermes, of course, who appears to have, as we mentioned before, a successful union of bliss. Don't say happy ever after in your essay, that's a bit sort of cliche in year 9. But that's ironic, isn't it? Because of the fate that Lamia and Lysias have, distinctly unlike that of the nymph and Hermes. So why is this antagonistic? Why is this worthy of being classed as, at this point anyway, an antagonist? Well, look, Lamia asks who that old man is. Interesting gap there, because later on, she says, when she consents to marry Lysias, she says, yep, fine, I'll agree to marry you, just don't invite that Apollonius fella. So there's an interesting gap. Does she find out who Apollonius is, if you like, off stage later on in a bit of the poem that we're not given? But here she seems to suggest, you have to be wary with Lamia, of course, that she doesn't know who this Apollonius character is, but yet later on she expressly forbids Lysias to invite him. So consider that when you're considering Lamia, perhaps. Is she being 100% honest? But that's for a different video. Why is he an antagonist? Lysias replied, "'Tis Apollonius, sage, my trusty guide and good instructor. But tonight he seems the ghost of folly, haunting my sweet dreams." Okay, so there's a brilliant line to capture that sort of allegorical conflict embodied in characters, but characters are often allegorical. You should be all over that for AO2 if the question lets you. Sweet dreams, I was going to burst into the eurythmics then, but I won't, are being haunted by the cruel, penetrative stare, the love and the sort of escapism and seclusion of paradise. The sweet dreams are in jeopardy through the Persian, I think it is later, the adjective, gaze of Apollonius. Moving on. Moving up here to lines 510 to 515, there's that injunction, there's that kind of instruction, if you like. But if now as it seems, Lysias, your Lysias, vision rests with any pleasure on me, the idea of a sort of roving guy looking for satisfaction and completion, being finished or over, there's Lysias content with Lamia, wants to devote his life to her. Do not bid old Apollonius from him keep me hid. So go with your allegorical reading again, all right? Love and the truth of Lamia, if you like, her previous and past identity. Maybe a sort of comment in terms of what it's like for a woman to have a sense of social respectability if she has a past. In sort of a real world metaphor there, perhaps. She wants him away. And Lysias is kind of perplexed at those words. And she feigns asleep when he inquires about that further. A little bit of foreshadowing there. And he, to the dull shade of deep sleep, in a moment was betrayed. So a dull shade and fade, quite a common rhyme that Keats uses towards the end to sort of foreshadow Lamia's fate. Last one here, here's Lysias screaming at the guest he didn't exactly invite, but just prior to this toasted and acknowledged. So I guess that was a sort of sign of approval of his presence as Lysias raises a toast to Apollonius, the uninvited guest. So he shouts at Apollonius, shut those juggling eyes. Juggling means deceiving, full of trickery. Now, in terms of tragedy, deceiving, deceit and trickery, you're getting towards your dissembler figure, aren't you? Your many-faced figure. So Iago, all your classic villains and your Shakespearean tragedies. That adjective is perfect for that there. Thou ruthless man, turn them, your eyes, aside. So we're getting that sort of destructive stare again. Lysias is invoking the gods here as well, which is quite a common tragedy thing in terms of fate and how a character's character arc resolves. So he says here, turn your eyes away, or the gods may pierce your eyes, Apollonius, on the sudden with the thorn of painful blindness. So, if you like, there's sort of a divine retribution. Look at the damage your eyes and your gaze has done. The god should instantly blind you with thorns. Remember the flowers that Apollonius was given? You sort of get personalised flowers in this wedding. His was spear grass, again, so that idea of something sharp and penetrative again. And Lysias believes that in trembling old age, the feeblest fright of your conscience should long haunt and offend you. Maybe a bit of a sort of a King Lear nod there in terms of punishment for your inability to see, or kind of turned inside out here, your ability to see and be too harsh and too cruel with thought and reason. The fate of being blinded would be a just punishment. A lot of blinding, of course, in King Lear, the blinding of Gloucester, metaphorical blindness, all those kinds of things. Last little moment of Lysias' speech here. Calls Apollonius' gaze demon eyes. Just come back to the previous line in a moment. Corinthians, see, my sweet bride withers at their potency. Okay, so see and potency. You've got your sort of repeated half rhyme of see and see twice there. Look at withers as well. There's an adjective prior to that where Apollonius is described as wrinkled. Yes, in some senses that's a sort of symbol of his old age and therefore wisdom, but I would link it to this word here, withers, is that penetrative gaze he fixes upon Lamia has just destroyed and removed all the life and vitality out of the love between Lysias and Lamia. Just want to come back to this previous brilliant description here. Mark how, notice how, possessed his lashless eyelids stretch around his demon eyes. Okay, so I'm going to just pop up something here on the left, just so you can see what I think Keats is hinting at here. Complete role reversal. And given that role reversal, what does that now make Apollonius? Obviously, we're keeping an eye on the concept of an antagonist. Well, if the wedding of Lamia and Lysias is their version of happy ever after, paradise, satisfaction and bliss within love and passion, that makes this wedding a form of Eden. And therefore, Apollonius, given that the gift we're looking at on the left, with his lashless eyelids and demon eyes, makes Apollonius the snake in paradise to spoil the perfection and bliss of our new sort of Adam and Eve, if you like. So, very interesting concepts there to explore in terms of Apollonius as a possible and likely, certainly worthy of the title antagonist. However, because we're Keats, and because Keats writes brilliantly ambiguous characters and produces much ambivalence in the readers, we have this just after Lysias's tirade at Apollonius. We get this from sort of Apollonius's perspective. Fool, fool, repeated he. From every ill, this is Apollonius addressing Lysias, from every ill of life have I preserved thee to this day, and shall I see thee made a serpent's prey? Now, once upon a time and at earlier points in the poem, structurally, the reader has been entitled, I think, to fear for Lysias becoming a serpent's prey. Certainly with all the association that the reader arrives at the poem with, in terms of a Lamia, an enchantress, a seductress, a femme fatale, a devourer of children, a destroyer of men. But I don't think that's the case by the time we get to this late in the poem, in Keats's version of a Lamia, or Lamia in this poem. Okay, but look at Apollonius. The word preserved is extremely important there. We've raised in class how we speak about antagonists and how they don't always see themselves as an antagonist, or they kind of justify their wrongdoing to themselves, partially, completely, depending on their psyche and their state of mind. Look at Apollonius here. He thinks he is doing an act of preservation towards his student, whom he should guide and steer throughout life's pitfalls and life's challenges. And then, unrelentingly, he says it again, a serpent, echoed he. No sooner said than with a frightful scream she vanished. So shade and fade, all that kind of stuff that's been foreshadowed prior to this has come true. Again, there's that sharpness with Apollonius's gaze, look, like a sharp spear, went through her utterly, keen, cruel, prescient, which means piercing. Okay, so all the stuff you mentioned earlier, that fits in perfectly with that. But look at cruel, though. That's the narrator there. Okay, so don't forget, Apollonius has already outed, if you like, Lamia for what she was previously. Not anymore, of course. We must bear that in mind. She once was a snake and has undergone tremendous pain to be with her love. So arguably he could stop there, but no. He looked again and again a level, and then at line 722 there, a serpent echoed he. So there is cruelty there. First of all, with the unmasking and unveiling, key thing you see in the poem just before that, but he repeats it. It's, I don't know, sort of like salt in the wound, really. Yeah, the adjective cruel is justified there, I think. Okay, so I thought we would really go for the allegorical reading here now, and how Apollonius is an antagonist allegorically between these opposing and conflicting forces of thought and reason, in contrast to love, passion, bliss, happiness, these kinds of things. So, backtracking a little bit here to an earlier section. So in they, all the wedding guests, hurried, amazed, curious and keen, except one, who looked thereon with eye severe, there we go again with that kind of penetrative, prescient stare, and with calm planted steps walked in austere. 'Twas Apollonius. Something too he laughed. He laughed about something as well, if you like, as though some knotty problem that had daft his patient thought. Okay, daft means baffled and bewildered. So, as he walks into the wedding here, some problem or issue that Apollonius has been musing over, mulling over, he's had a kind of eureka moment, has now begun to thaw and solve. There's your logic, there's your enemy of negative capability, if you like, and melt. So look at thaw and melt, and then look down here, line 650 plus, the unweaving of a rainbow, as it erewhile made the tender person of Lamia melt. So look at thaw and melt again into a shade. So the beautiful dream and the happiness and the concept of happiness, which Lamia embodies, represents allegorically, is about to be solved with Apollonius's logic. Now, we must latch on to the phrase here, the knotty problem. We've mentioned earlier the wreathed imagery associated with Lamia, intertwined, wreathed tomb, cerque couchant, all of those brilliant references to interwoven imagery. And we have some more here as well, with wool-woofed carpets, 50 wreaths of smoke. In short, it's how do you solve a problem like Lamia? Don't put that in your essay, for goodness sake. But there's the idea. Apollonius is going to solve this problem, but look at the cost and the consequences, as Lysias is left holding nothing, an empty space where his betrothed once lay, before Apollonius unveils her and she vanished into a shade. I just want to recall our earlier point here as well, in terms of Apollonius and Keats' sort of brilliance in his ability to problematise and complicate notions of antagonism and victim and all these kinds of things. If you look here, he gives Apollonius a key moment. So Apollonius is quite polite and I guess sort of apologetic, really, if you look here, to his young disciple. It is no common rule, Lysias, for an invited guest to force himself upon you and infest with an unbidden presence the bright throng of younger friends. So you can see the difference there in a sort of age contrast. The older learned wisdom of the sophist, and the young and the revelries and the enjoyment they're having. Yet must I do this wrong. So, the abstract noun there, the wrong, he acknowledges, Apollonius, that this is not a polite or well-meaning thing to do. But, look at the modal verb there, yet must I do this wrong, and you, if you like, must forgive me. Now, that really complicates claims to antagonism, and in a way I don't wish to resolve this. It's purely your interpretation, of course, how you ultimately, in conclusion, you view Apollonius. But at the level of character itself, which Keats gives him, this is a burden. Apollonius feels compelled or obliged to do something so quote-unquote wrong, but it's an obligation and a duty to someone he presumably cares for, and, as we saw previous, is intent on preserving or to preserve. So I guess the equivalent is, if you have to tell a friend something deeply uncomfortable that they won't want to hear, but you feel the need to tell them that outweighs the hurt or the anger they're going to have towards you. A tricky conundrum, a knotty problem. Going back to that sort of wreathed imagery. Ultimately, I guess that wreathed imagery can be a sort of symbol for love and commitment and happiness. The opposing forces in John Keats's mind of logic and reason compared to passion and love. I suppose we'd call it a head versus heart decision. But these are the dilemmas that I think Keats has had and then chooses to assign to various characters allegorically throughout the course of his poem. One last thing here as well before we get on to Lysias later. Lysias blushed and led. Now look at that active verb. He is Apollonius, the uninvited guest, but Lysias, despite Lamia's injunction and instruction, chooses to, there's the active verb, led the old man through the inner doors, broad spread. So you can use that for our later antagonist as well when we get onto it, the outside world encroaching upon the inner sanctum, the sort of Edenic paradise and bliss of seclusion and separation. The outside is encroaching and infiltrating, corrupting, if you like, that lovely marble slab imagery of the dark veins which goes through the beautiful marble slab to corrupt and destroy from within. Finally here we're looking at the kind of examples of nature, the flowers or plant life awarded to them here in the wedding. We notice Lamia gets on her aching forehead the leaves of willow and of adder tongue, which reminded me of that previous sort of serpentine persona. For the youth, Lysias, quick, let us strip for him the Thyrsus, I don't know how on earth you're supposed to pronounce that, but there we go, which is the vine-covered staff of Bacchus, used to signify drunkenness. So there's that escape from logic and reason into sort of hedonistic pleasure and abandonment, delightfully drunk, away from the day-to-day realities of life. And for the sage, there's the speargrass, spiteful thistle. So there you go, just a little reminder of the sort of the damage that is done from Apollonius and his gaze, and I like spiteful as well. So narrator there steering you towards how to view Apollonius. This is an act of spite. Yes, Apollonius himself, as we saw over on the left there, thinks this is a necessary pain and painful truth he has to bring to his disciple, but the narrator seems to think differently here and steering the reader towards, is there any need? Was that merited or justified? Here's some lovely stuff about negative capability as well. Do not all charms fly at the mere touch of cold philosophy? So remember we looked at wrinkled and wither. So the touch of cold philosophy is almost like the death touch for reason. From reason for love and happiness. A brilliant line, this, just amazing writing. Philosophy will clip an angel's wings, conquer all mysteries by rule and line, empty the haunted air and nomad mine, unweave a rainbow. Okay, so look at the brutality and cruelty of clipping an angel's wings. Why on earth would you unmake a rainbow? Maybe a symbol for Lamia herself and the love, the possibility of love she offers. But we're back to Knotty Problem here, aren't we? Unweaving, yes, in one sense it solves and uncomplicates, but by the same token, or the other side of that coin is, you unweave and unmake the sort of fantastical and the possibility and the dream and love itself, I guess. The tender-personed Lamia melt into a shade. Last few moments here in terms of Apollonius as the antagonist. We look here and we see there's Lysias in his love trance. So he scarcely sees another room in his face, another face in the room, sorry. He's besotted, checking his love trance, so he just kind of breaks from that for a moment. Opposite sent forth a look, excuse me, to beseech a glance from his old teacher's wrinkled, we mentioned that before, the cold touch of philosophy, and pledge him. So engaging with the look of Apollonius sort of is something which leads to, or can be seen as sort of consent of Apollonius's presence. So Lysias isn't entirely blameless in this either. He doesn't eject or have Apollonius removed, despite the harm which does come. Antagonistic behaviour here from Apollonius, the bald-headed philosopher. It's a good look if you ask me. Had fixed his eye without a twinkle or stare, full on. So look at fixed and full on. There are no sort of sniper rifles in the era of Keats, but it's almost like the crosshairs of a target or you know, a weapon being focused on Lamia. Full on the alarmed, she's terrified, beauty of the bride, browbeating her fair form. Okay, so in the same way you had clipping the wings of an angel, or you know, crushing a butterfly with something heavy, this is unnecessary, harsh, cruel, excessive violence. Okay, so browbeating her beautiful appearance and troubling her sweet pride. We're just starting to get into maybe Cupid / love as an antagonist here as well, because look, Lysias notices how disturbed Lamia is, grabs her hand, it was icy, then suddenly her hand grew hot, and all the pains of an unnatural heat shot to his heart, resisting the urge to sing Bon Jovi there. I will spare you of that. But in this poem, we can steer that towards Cupid, who, don't forget, has apparently sanctioned and blessed and approved of this union, only to then give them a wedding day which ends in tragedy and loss. But more on the little fat boy with the wings and the bow and arrow later. Quick look here at the destructive effect that Apollonius' presence and gaze is having. Here is Lysias terrified now that life is draining away from his bride. Excuse me. Lamia, he cried, and no soft-toned reply. Just a little structural reminder there of her previous powers, her sort of siren-like ability to enchant and charm with her voice, her music. That's gone, okay? The many heard, and the loud revelry of the band and the music and the wedding grew hush. The stately music no more breathes, the myrtle sickened in 1,000 wreaths. So that corruptive influence upon nature. Myrtle is a plant which is sacred to Venus, capital V, and so hence an emblem of love. Okay, so there is love being destroyed there. By faint degrees, voice, lute, and pleasure ceased, and that sort of anthropomorphic use of silence there, deadly silence, step by step increased. Silence is this kind of living entity walking through the wedding. Very powerful writing, but I love the symbolism there of myrtle, an allusion to Venus being killed, linked that to Apollonius, wrinkled, withered, all these kind of corruptive and destructive influences. Antagonist? Absolutely. From one perspective. Just the last few things here on the other side of the slide. We also get that idea of corruption and ruin again. So all was blight. So that's about line 692, which you can see there. A brilliant structural feature here as well. No passion to illume left in Lamia's face. The deep recessed vision. Okay, a brilliant structural quote to remind you, just to kind of drag you back and hook you back to the moment where Hermes and the nymph, apparently, I keep using that sort of hedging adverb, you can cast doubt on all of those things. That's a different reading, a different question, to the apparent bliss that Hermes and the nymph achieved as they disappeared into the green recessed wood. You need that exact quote if you're going to match that up with this moment here at 692, the deep recessed vision. There's the massive disparity and difference between the bliss achieved by Hermes and the nymph, enabled by Lamia, kindly, that is an act of kindness, but don't forget she had something in that for herself as well. I don't want to go into the reading of how the nymph is treated. That's for a different video or a different argument. But there's that reminder. She, to some degree, has helped play Cupid and help Hermes, the god, and the nymph achieve bliss together. This is being denied her now with all his blight. No longer fair, deadly white, shut those juggling eyes, which we mentioned earlier. And finally, look there with Apollonius, begone foul dream. So just a reminder of your allegorical readings. He is thought and reason. In opposition to that is a dream. Dreams which can become reality if love is achieved. That kind of romanticist sort of thinking here and belief in the possibility of love. I just wanted to zoom in on Lysias as well. Thou ruthless man. So the narrator has been critical of Apollonius's actions, and understandably, I guess. Lysias is also showing his contempt towards Apollonius. Shut those juggling eyes, thou ruthless man. Well, let's not forget just a little bit earlier, he led Apollonius, active verb, into the wedding, despite the instruction from his betrothed not to do so. Okay, so there's Apollonius and the things we could use to illustrate him as a contender. One of the contenders at various points for antagonist in Keats's brilliant poem. Okay, this next sort of contender for an antagonist, starting at the opposite really. We're starting with seclusion and bliss in love. We're going for like an Edenic paradise where the lovers are removed and away from prying eyes and the problems and the troubles of the outside world. So Lycius and Lamia are into Corinth now, and they had arrived before a pillared porch. More of that in a moment. With a lofty portal door, and then we come down to here where the ample span of the wide doors disclosed a place unknown, some time to any, but those two alone. The few Persian mutes who were there, the most interesting characters in the poem, in my opinion, who that same year were seen about the markets. No one at all, knew where they, Lycius and Lamia, could inhabit. The most curious, where have Lycius and Lamia gone to? So, I don't know, the modern equivalent, OK Magazine, Hello Magazine, The Paparazzi, trying to find where the former snake woman and this young lad from Corinth are shacked up and hiding. They, the most curious, were foiled, who watched to trace them to their house. So we do have this kind of bliss, this kind of Eden, this kind of love nest, I guess, away from prying eyes. However, if you go back and look, Keats is already foreshadowing how this is destined to end in, I guess, prying eyes, the outside encroaching upon it, and how love cannot remain apart and separate and hidden for very long. This bit always makes me think of John and Yoko in their bed, but then obviously they invited the press in. Or the brilliant John Donne poem, The Sun Rising, when he feels he has everything he ever needs because his beloved is in bed with him, and they are together in the bedroom, and the bedroom becomes the world, and all he could ever want is contained in that room. A lovely sentiment, even if that can be contradicted when you read that poem as well. But look, line 390, a pillared porch. Okay, so we're looking something symbolic here as solid. Okay, now this is going to represent the cold, hard, logical stare presence of Apollonius, because Lamia is reduced to, well, insubstantial, ethereal substances. She is a dream and will be made to disappear to a shade, to a mist, to a vapour, and then ultimately gone. So even that is hinting at the victory of cold, hard logic. A lofty portal door, so lofty, high, it allows lots of access. A silver lamp with a phosphor glow, that's illuminating where they are. A little reminder perhaps of a transformation from a serpentine form into a mortal figure. Mild as a star in water. Now, here's your Edenic sort of unspoiled paradise idea. For so new and so unsullied was the marble hue. So through the crystal polish, beautiful, reflective, shimmering sort of light here, liquid fine of the piece of marble, ran the dark veins that none but feet divine could ever have touched there. So, already foreshadowing that idea of the snake in paradise. Paradise, yes, the Garden of Eden, mankind could not have wanted for anything more or extra until the dark veins within it came along and tempted us, and then we were evicted and cast out from paradise. So, and then we get over here on the other side. Those who are trying to find them are foiled, and but, so look at 406 here. The flitter-winged verse must tell, for truth's sake, what woe afterwards befell. So a little moment of prolepsis there, almost acting like a choric figure, with a chorus in a tragedy. We have that mention of flitter-winged verse, poetry, the story that Keats is writing. But look, just on from that in the start of part 2. Besides there, nightly, in this love nest, this secluded love nest, nightly with terrific glare. So there's that idea of light and exposure again. Love, capital L, who is Cupid, grown jealous of so complete a pair, hovered and buzzed his wings with fearful roar above the lintel of their chamber door, and down the passage cast a glow upon the floor. Some very Eve of St Agnes imagery there with light and exposure as well. But there's Cupid itself, jealous of these two lovers. Now, Cupid is supposed to facilitate love. Accidentally, haphazardly, he is blindfolded and fires his arrows, and people fall in love arbitrarily or accidentally. But look at love there, or Cupid, acting as the antithesis to, or the enemy of love, spoiling it and trying to destroy it. So you can get two for the price of one there. You can get Cupid as the antagonist, but you can also see the outside starting to encroach upon and spoil and destroy the bliss and the beauty. We don't do him, but that's a very sort of Blakean idea in his brilliant songs of innocence and experience. If you have this pastoral Edenic bliss within nature, very soon the world of experience starts to encroach upon it and destroy it. Here's another key moment of the outside encroaching upon the Edenic sort of bliss and paradise the two lovers enjoy. I'm just going to take you to this bit here. We've got here where Keats mentions, there they reposed, where use had made it sweet, with eyelids closed, saving a tithe which love still open kept. You can read that line, where use had made it sweet, as a sort of a hint or a suggestion that they'd consummated their relationship, okay? Use, they'd been physically intimate and had made it, the room, sweet, okay? So that's maybe important to bear in mind, that they have enjoyed that pleasure too, before Apollonius comes and kills it all with his harsh stare. Or, if you like, at the top of the page there, terrific glare. Keats is suggesting they've achieved some kind of regal or deified state. Remember, Hermes and the nymph were going to enjoy love outside of mortality, because that's what their love elevated them to. So side by side here, Lycius and Lamia, they were enthroned. So you can go back to all the opening bits of the poem where Hermes is described as leaving a golden throne on Mount Olympus to search for love. These guys are elevated now. Love lift us up where we belong, that kind of thing. Apologies for my bad musical references again. Near to a curtaining, look at the outside here, whose airy texture from a golden string floated into the room. So that's hardly, put up the barricades, is it, and the shutters, and arm the battlements in a castle. This is open and exposed. A curtaining, not exactly a solid protection, is it? Well, look, the airy texture which floated into the room, and let appear, ta-da, okay, remember the prying eyes and the nosy and the snoopers of the paparazzi who wanted to locate and find these two. Let appear unveiled the summer heaven blue and clear, betwixt two marble shafts. Now, in one sense, this is the beauty of nature again. It's a romanticist poem, of course. It is nice to unveil the summer heaven blue and clear, as I'm looking out the window now, and that's lovely to look at. But by the same token, unveiled, that foreshadows the cruel unmasking of Lamia's former identity at her own wedding, which results in the tragic fate for Lamia and Lysias after that. But look, betwixt two marble shafts, look at the contrast of airy, floated, let's see if anything else fits into that, heaven, I guess, of that kind of removed bliss, and then the two marble shafts, the solidity of that symbolism which represents cold, hard, unbending and cruel logic, the marble shafts. It might make you think of colleges as well. There's something of Aristotle about Apollonius with his bald head and his curly beard and his wrinkled forehead and his gowns. So definitely use that as some symbolism, I think. Okay, and then we obviously get the outside coming in as well. Deafening the swallow's twitter, the beautiful music of birdsong, came a thrill of trumpets. You can be a bit sort of Judgment Day about that. It's definitely a harsh, abrasive sound. The sounds fled, but left a thought, a buzzing in his head. Now, we've just seen buzzed his wings just above there. So there's a reminder of how Cupid / love is sort of a co-conspirator in the fate, the tragic fate of these two. But we also see, there they reposed with eyelids closed, that they might see each other while they almost slept. So even in this kind of half love daze, this love trance, where they are sort of half awake, half asleep, but blissed out in their love of each other, this kind of post-coital happiness, perhaps, that's disturbed, because the outside comes knocking and plucks, if you like, Lysias away from there. So we're getting to sort of that eviction from paradise again, a cruel removal from that separated state of bliss, because it's buzzing in his head. For the first time since he harboured, a little reminder of sirens and ships maybe, in that purple-lined palace of sweet sin, there's further evidence for me that they've consummated their relationship, been physically intimate. His spirit, again a little parallel with Lamia, who could go wandering in a dream state, passed beyond its golden bourne. Okay, so look at purple, look at golden, look at enthroned. They have achieved a kind of godly bliss or paradise. But can't stay in there, sunshine. The real world is a beckoning into the noisy world, almost, but not quite, forsworn or abandoned. So we can think in terms of peripeteia here, okay? The lovers have achieved that exalted state of bliss, regal, sort of godly, the things I've highlighted, but nothing good ever lasts. Love will tear us apart. Nothing ever lasts forever, and a million other songs about the pain within love. Moving on. Okay, further stuff here to go with the idea, the argument, if you wish to make it, if it's relevant to your question, of Cupid itself as an antagonist to the two lovers. Just start on the right hand side here for a change, 530 to 555. From nowhere, the wedding sort of manifests itself, and we wonder why. She did so, but 'tis doubtful how and whence came, and who were her subtle servitors. About the halls and to and from the doors, there they are open again, wide, letting the outside in, there was a noise of wings. Now, that's not going to be Batman. So, in the poem we've been looking at, obviously we're looking at Cupid, till in short space the glowing banquet room shone with wide arched grace, a haunting music. So there we go. A click of the fingers, a flap of the wings, bippity boppity boo. Cupid is putting everything before the couple to enjoy their wedding day. Or is he? We've already heard jealous and envious of so two complete lovers. So I think there's evidence here to consider this as an act of cruelty, a setup almost, where Cupid creates this beautiful scene from nothing, out of the ether, in order to bring about the cruel presence of Apollonius and destroy love. Cupid destroying love. What a brilliant sort of Keatsian paradoxical idea, but lends perfectly to the tragedy of Lycius and Lamia. Just across these two extracts now, I want to zoom in on the sort of veiled and unveiled imagery, the closed and the opened. So we're looking over here on the left. It was the custom then to bring away the bride from home at blushing shut of day, veiled in a chariot heralded along. Opposite of veiled, unveiled. So we're getting that idea of not very well protected. What kind of protection is a veil? But, you know, the cruel unveiling of Lamia's former self by Apollonius. We've also got plenty of that here as well when we look over at, where's it gone now? We've got some lovely imagery here of two palms and then two plantains and so on. From either side, their stems branched one to one, all down the aisle at place. So there's nature bending magically to create this sort of canopy, this guard of honour, if you like, as they walk up the aisle. But look, there ran a stream of lamps straight on from wall to wall. Do you remember the idea earlier of Cupid exposing where they are and lighting and revealing? These are almost guiding lights, you could argue, for Apollonius to home in and locate where the wedding is so he can perform what he feels as his duty to exposed. We've got here the fretted splendour of each nook and niche, so more interwoven imagery there, fretted, like weaving a ponytail, I guess. And then we get the larger wove in small intricacies. So more of that idea of weaving, the knotty problem, to be unweaved and unmade, an act of cruelty. But that's the cruel, harsh work of reason and logic, I guess. Just here on 555, approving all, she faded at self-will and shut the chamber up. Close, or close, you could read that as, I think it's close. Hushed and still, complete and ready for the revels rude, when dreadful guests would come to spoil her solitude. So just a little hark back to that earlier stuff of that secluded bliss. She's consented to marriage, but once the outside world are aware of it, the tragic trajectory, the peripeteia, speeds along here in the poem. Okay, let's move on to Lysias as a potential candidate. At certain stages, we need this subtlety. It's a long, complex narrative poem which has tragic aspects in it, which means the reader's perceptions of characters will change as the portrayal of the characters change. Let's look at Lysias, which might seem a strange thing to do, to consider him as an antagonist, but these are interpretations, as ever. They're there for you to sift through, evaluate. These are just my readings, which doesn't mean they're infallible, perfect, all this kind of stuff. So, Lysias starts out in a very different way. When we first hear of him, we hear he's been praying to Jove. So he's a good, devout young gentleman who pays proper respects to his gods. He sounds a good lad, even though there are some suggestions at times he is lingering outside of brothels. Take of that what you will. Is the lingering outside mean he hasn't gone in which case he's still a virgin, he's still curious about the mysteries of the female flesh, or does that imply he's a regular visitor there? I happen to think it's the first one. I think he's curious about women, but maybe is still pure. But you can disagree with that, of course. Now, then we get to this bit. So we start off as a polite young gentleman, it seems, and then we get to this moment here where he notices that she is watching him, and she has noticed a kind of worry come across his brow when he hears the trumpet. And then we come to this. Why do you sigh, fair creature? Whispered he. Why do you think? Returned she tenderly. You have deserted me. Where am I now? Not in your heart while care weighs on your brow. No, you have dismissed me, and I go from your breast houseless. It must be so. So Lamia has observed that the trumpet has taken his mind away from the bliss and the seclusion, the secluded bliss, if you like, of their love nest. Just a great little quote there for the idea of reason and logic encroaching upon that blissful seclusion. A moment's thought is passion's passing bell. Brilliant quote for that allegorical clash. But then we get this change in Lysias, which is, I guess, uncharacteristic and slightly unusual. But, you know, who am I to tell Keats how to write and all this kind of stuff? And his thoughts turn towards marriage and possession and ownership of Lamia in a little bit of a manner that reminds you of My Last Duchess, perhaps. Not that we're doing comparisons, one's crime, one's tragedy, but this might help you to understand here the change in Lysias. So sometimes the most dangerous question in a relationship is, what are you thinking? And we have this here, almost like a Pandora's box idea, but we've got unveil again, so that uncloaking, revealing of things is starting to emerge in the poem. So bottom of this column here, my thoughts, shall I unveil them? Listen then. And this is where Lysias becomes a bit more sort of uncharacteristic, I think, of what he's been previously. What mortal hath a prize that other men may be confounded and abashed withal? But let it sometimes pace abroad majestical, and triumph as in thee I should rejoice amid the hoarse alarm of Corinth's voice. Let my foes choke and my friends shout afar, while through the thronged streets your bridal car wheels round its dazzling spokes. Okay, so the marriage to Lamia almost becomes a status symbol, what we'd call in more modern parlance a trophy wife, I guess. But it's about a sign of victory over his foes. I can't recall any kind of antagonism towards Lysias in the poem. Who are his foes? We don't see them. They're never referenced. But Lysias goes all sort of chest beating here and alpha male, and the claiming of Lamia is going to be some kind of status symbol or victory that he has married such a beautiful woman. Look at the effect this has on Lamia, the previously powerful, omniscient, magical Lamia. The lady's cheek trembled, pale and meek. She knelt before him. Massive role reversal there. Wept a rain of sorrow at his words. So clearly the idea of marriage and ownership and possession is something of great pain to Lamia here. While his hand she wrung, to change his purpose. He thereat was stung. And we've seen enough of sort of snake penetrative imagery to know where that's going. Perverse with stronger fancy to reclaim. So look at ownership there, okay? Her wild and timid nature to his aim. So we're looking at conquest and sort of ownership here. Aim might make you think of Cupid, the idea of arrows piercing the heart and being overcome by love. Besides, for all his love in self-despite, against his better self, he took delight luxurious in her sorrows, soft and new. His passion, cruel grown, took on a hue, a colour, fierce and sanguineous as 'twas possible, in one whose brow had no dark veins to swell. Fine was the mitigated fury, like Apollo's presence, when in act to strike the serpent. Okay, so look at how sort of imperial and full of conquest and mastery and power Lysias is starting to appear here, or be presented by Keats as, sorry. Keats tempers that a little bit here with the adjective mitigated fury. Fine was the mitigated or lessened or reduced fury, and then he's comparing Lysias to like Apollo's presence. So he sort of deifies him, gives him godly powers or status. A strange shift in the power dynamic here. Lamia is knelt in front of Lysias, but look at this. She burned. She loved the tyranny. So there's Lysias sort of becoming the dominant male, if you like, the owner and possessor of Lamia. There's maybe some kind of satire here and critique of the marriage ceremony here, in terms of that to be married requires the man, certainly in Keats's era, to take ownership and possession of the female here. So she loved the tyranny, and she is subdued, and she consented to the hour. This is very un-Lamia-like of anything we've seen previously in the poem, and she consents. So there's maybe a sort of coming of age there in terms of his masculinity, but there has been that sort of aggressive shift or change within Lysias. Previously devout, apparently shy and bashful, but there he is sort of stepping up really in terms of being the husband and the conqueror and the owner of Lamia, which apparently she finds attractive here. She loved the tyranny. So does this give us some claim to consider Lysias in terms of an antagonist? Maybe so. Maybe to a smaller degree compared to everyone else that we're considering for this. But the narrator certainly seems to think so, certainly in this moment. So the day appeared of the wedding and all the gossip rout. O senseless Lysias, madman. So the narrator here is really biased and displays bias at line 560 here onwards. Senseless Lysias, lots of hissing sibilants there, so maybe positioning him as sort of a duplicitous antagonist, a la the snake in the Garden of Eden. Madman, wherefore flout? Here's the narrator's sort of incredulity, a WTF moment from the narrator. Why would you break or go against flout the silent blessing fate, warm cloistered hours back in their love nest of seclusion, away from public and prying eyes, and show to common eyes these secret bowers? So there's a real sort of puzzlement here and incredulity, incredulous, a disbelief from the narrator of why Lysias would choose to leave the sanctity of their Eden just to show publicly the common eyes the contents of these secret bowers, this secrecy and this secluded bliss they have. Now, we don't want to map this too much onto Keats and his relationship with his great love, Fanny Brawne, but there's some interesting avenues to explore there. However, I would strongly urge you to keep that out of any essays. AQA have a real abhorrence and hatred of biographical info. If you pull them on this, they'll say they won't. They don't, but they do. Okay, and then look, we get the herd approached. So why ruin a beautiful thing of privacy and sanctity by wanting to make a public spectacle and declaration of their love? A strong anti-marriage sentiment there, but reason, I think, to give some consideration towards Lysias as a potential antagonist with his vain sort of imperialistic conquest and spectacle of claiming this beautiful woman as his wife. Okay, I hope that's been useful for you. There's some possible angles of interpretation, different ways to view and consider a few characters as fulfilling the role of antagonist. I don't want you to pick a winner. I mean, you can have that as a discussion if you wish, of who is most antagonistic or who most befits or is worthy of antagonist in Keats's brilliant poem. But that's the beauty of the discussion this brilliant poem creates or inspires. When I make it, please check out the video exploring Lamia herself as the antagonist in the poem, to some degree, partially, to an extent, at various points. But here's an extra option for you to consider as well. If you like the video, please add some likes, add some comments, subscribe, tell a friend, tell anyone you wish. Thank you very much.